Joker. Oh, Joker, that film, it was an earth-shaking phenomenon. I don't know if you remember. There's not really another way to look at it, and yet its success and enduring legacy was not what its announcement and pre-release discourse pretended. Arriving late 2019 after the smoke had cleared on the MCU's decade-long blaze of success, both critical and commercial, Joker seemed a volatile object poised to take hold in a moment of transition and uncertainty. Where were comic book movies headed? Would the world still have an appetite for the color and tone that Marvel made an industry standard while DC struggled to find a comparable footing in the marketplace? Or was there room for something new? Heated debates raged between comic book fans and elder statesmen like Martin Scorsese, arguing that despite their massive commercial success, comic book movies were more of a diversion or passing spectacle than an enduring conduit for cinema. It was curious then that DC had an odd round in the chamber, a grounded comic book film not wed to the increasingly muddy Snyder continuity. Continuity, for the record, I quite enjoyed and still continue to enjoy, but existing in its own vacuum, indebted not to the superhero films that had come before it, but hewing closer to gritty New York cinema of the 70s. On top of that, the film was to be directed by Todd Phillips, who, despite his success within the studio system with popular films like Old School and the Hangover trilogy, had a deeply mean streak that could be traced back to his early work at NYU, where he made a film about G.G. Allin, the controversial musician, and commissioned poster art from convicted serial killer John Wayne Gacy. Yes, this really happened. Are we surprised this man made a Joker movie? Good lord. Enter Joker, an R-rated drama starring one of the greatest actors of its generation, purporting to root the character in the ideological grime of contemporary masculinity, helmed by a noted provocateur unafraid to challenge and alienate his audience in questionable taste. Before its release, it inspired more impassioned discourse and think pieces from people who had seen no more than a teaser trailer than most films inspire in their entire run. Initial reactions from Venice found the film to be a towering achievement, but one that seemed so raw and of its moment, they feared it might incite real violence. On top of that, a chorus of online voices feared that the film would galvanize the slumbering giant of the online incel community and give it a face in Joaquin Phoenix's Arthur Fleck. In the final days leading up to its release, theater chains even got in on this, making public statements about increased security for screenings to ensure a safe movie-going experience. On the eve of Joker's unleashing upon the world, these meteorological conditions seemed the perfect brew for a storm of violence and controversy, the likes of which mainstream cinema had never seen. And then audiences saw the movie, and they loved it. This whole controversy, it was just making a mountain out of a molehill. Both fans and naysayers developed a parasocial relationship to the film as the mirror of Joker reflected their existing biases. It was whatever you wanted it to be, and no metric better to demonstrate that than when it opened to nearly $100 million, a significant achievement for a frightening R-rated comic book film. It went on to gross $1 billion at the box office without a single violent incident at even one screening, and it was also the first R-rated film to gross $1 billion. By the time the Academy Awards rolled out, Joker was positioned to take home multiple awards, and it did. What initially seemed like a film so volatile as to destabilize the industry turned out to be a noteworthy but ultimately conventional Hollywood hit that many would argue was not particularly radical in its text. Sure, it cribbed heavily from subversive work like Taxi Driver or The King of Comedy, but it was more affectation than substance, allowing audiences to revel in the aesthetics of cinema without its deeper challenges. For Todd Phillips, a guy who was almost certainly floored by the pre-release controversy, it would be hard not to feel a little deflated by his radical intentions giving way to near uniform mainstream acceptance. Joker was intended to be a one-off, a mic drop. Phillips even went on record saying the film would not have a follow-up. But after its unexpected success, when the studio agreed to greenlight a sequel, inflating the film's relatively modest $65 million budget to just north of $200 million, the mischievous devil in Phillips came to the fore. He knew he had one more shot here. Audience expectations be damned. It was time to fuck around. As alienating as Joker 2 may be for audiences, the opposite is true for this video's sponsor, Skillshare. They don't hate you. In fact, they love you and want to help you learn new skills or take existing ones to the next level. You've probably heard me talk about Skillshare on the channel before. I love them. They're an incredible service. I've especially been enjoying Hongshu's Beginner's Guide to Adobe After Effects, learning motion graphics, because goddamn do I love me some motion graphics, and this is such a comprehensive course where he breaks down the basics of After Effects, how he's working with real-life clients, and then you build your skills up from there. And it just, by the time I was done with the course, I really felt like, hey man, I could probably go, work for a big brand company and do some After Effects wizardry. I mean, not really, but he builds you with that kind of confidence, so I really appreciated that. Because it's very important to me to keep FilmSpeak varied and engaging in a way that stands out from the other guys doing it. Well, we do it to make these videos look good, and that's really what it comes down to at the end of the day. But the fun doesn't stop there. When I discovered Skillshare, I was shocked that I wasn't already hip to the internet's largest online learning community for creatives. They have thousands of courses designed by creative people for creative people, which means it's a much more accessible format for people like us. For me, and I imagine many of you, courses on film, drawing, and entrepreneurship with a unique hands-on approach have been instrumental in molding FilmSpeak into both a creative and professional enterprise. Don't get it twisted, I'm no joker. I stay on top of my creative pursuits by learning on Skillshare at every opportunity. Just think, if Arthur Fleck had spent a little less time being a weird guy and mad at his current place in the world and a little more time mastering a specific skill or competency with Skillshare's sequential class collection, maybe he wouldn't be the Joker. So get in the fall spirit, whether you're a student or an existential 30-year-old like me, and join Skillshare. It's never too late to take a class and train your brain. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. That's the first 500 of you to click that link in the description, get that 1-month free trial of Skillshare, and expand those big brains of yours, and get started today. And thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Much like the way Joker got away from Arthur and was adopted by others seeking change in Gotham, Phillips' film became co-opted by unrelated interests to serve a narrative he never intended. If there's one thing that seems to encapsulate Todd Phillips' frustration, is that the original Joker became a parasocial mirror for its audience. To some, it was this incel manifesto and a rallying cry for a particular sort of toxic masculinity. To others, it was a repudiation of incels and their kind, a hyperbole to demonstrate the dangers of that entitled worldview. However, not reflected in this mirror is Phillips' actual intention: to make a film about a world devoid of empathy, mirroring our own, with a deconstructed icon of pop culture as its avatar and a point of identification. The discourse around the film reconstructed its themes and POV in unrelated hot-button political language that only served to obfuscate the filmmaker's intended project: to make a really cool movie. Enter Joker 2, a $200 million anti-joke with one grand statement: some films shouldn't have sequels. Ironic? Sure, but what could be more Joker than taking a feature-length piss? The joke is on us. If we're going to go down this road again, we're going to get it right and settle the narrative once and for all. This is an outrage picture by design. Outrage over the movie because it completely destroys the fantasy that the first film created, regardless of your personal read as the incel vindication fantasy or the incel warning fantasy. Phillips understands that there is merit to having a film with a message, but he's also here to poke fun at the people who think they know what a film is about, but project a narrative of their own. But this time, he's here to give you what you want. You want a film with a grand statement? Here it is. Fuck you. The thing about the first Joker, for good and for ill, is that it's a pretty straightforward movie. It's not complicated in the slightest. It has the look of something more sophisticated, but that's more a product of Phillips and director of photography collaborator Lawrence Sher's love for a cinematic look than some grand political statement. Sure, the movie looks important, but that doesn't mean the movie purports to be important. This time around, Phillips says, "This is all stupid. We're making it a bigger deal than it needs to be." And he gives us a profoundly cynical piece of art that hates everything about movie making as a business, everything about fandom's hijacking of a narrative, and everything about the simple fallacy of expectation. Joker 2 dedicates as much real estate to its audience as a film with rampant fan service, but instead of serving the fans, he denies them meticulously at every turn, and I can't help but applaud a filmmaker poking me in the eye repeatedly for almost 2.5 hours. I can't think of another instance in recent history where such a large film bore such an obstinate relationship to its target audience. Is it fun to watch? I mean, maybe not in the traditional sense, but it is thrilling, it is interesting. My love for a film like Jurassic World and its sequels and its critical relationship to the source text is well documented on this channel, but that's a film, specifically that first one, that ultimately delivers traditionally satisfying spectacle to its audience. Joker 2 has no interest in that whatsoever. It is pushing at the outer limits of what you can do with a blockbuster as a conduit for pure and righteous anger. Love it or hate it, you can't deny that is something, especially in today's bleak landscape of tentpole films. One of the critical refrains that followed the first Joker movie around was that Todd Phillips does not understand what he made, that somehow he mistakenly made the film as described by the Parasocial faction cited earlier, rather than whatever he intended. But what Joker 2 proves is that we, the audience, maybe didn't understand Joker, and we will not leave this theater for Joker 2 until we do. The hardcore Joker fanboys, the stands, the studio, the general audience will all be humiliated by the time Phillips is through. We're going to break this down piece by piece, but let's start easy with the man of the hour, Arthur Fleck. One of the film's main objectives is to make clear that while Arthur is pathetic and deserving of our sympathy for the way his bones crunch under the gears of a broken societal machine, he's also a raging narcissist. There were attempts to over-intellectualize the mental health aspect of the first film, when in reality, it was merely a surface-level affliction for a shitty guy. The film did not intend to say, hey, if you're an incel suffering from anxiety, you're forgiven for all your behavior. And yet this aspect of the film became a focal point of discourse that Phillips aims to dispel this time around. Joker is not your friend. I mean, yeah, he gets taken advantage of, and he can be sympathetic like we mentioned before, but he's also kind of an asshole. For all his theatrics and grand gestures born of seeming ideals, he is completely oblivious to the feelings of those around him. He victimizes himself, wallowing in self-pity when, in reality, he is the perpetrator, not the victim. This is best demonstrated in one of the film's most effective dramatic scenes, arguably its centerpiece. Gary Puddles, the small man from the first film who witnessed Joker's violence, takes the stand to testify for the prosecution. He explains that Arthur murdered in cold blood and frightened him. Instead of empathizing with his former friend and co-worker, Arthur's first question, after mocking him ruthlessly in front of the courtroom, is whether or not Puddles saw him on the Murray Franklin show. Gary is perplexed by this line of questioning and explains that he was in protective custody with the Gotham police because of a fear that Joker might try to tie up loose ends. Arthur doesn't understand and says, "I like you, Gary. I wouldn't hurt you," to which Gary responds, in short, he's already been hurt. He can't sleep. The effects of Joker's actions have left a years-long tale of destruction to which he's completely oblivious. To drive a final stake through his heart, Gary reminds Arthur he was the only one who was kind to him. He thought they were friends, and now that friend has kind of become the bully because he felt slighted by society. Gary wasn't Arthur's only friend. For all of his grievances and singling out those who make life hard for him, what he doesn't register are those who extend more kindness than he realizes, such as Brendan Gleeson's character at the beginning or Catherine Keener. He's mad at the lot he got in life, and instead of doing something about it, he chooses to take his anger out on the world. Phillips' message to sad individuals with a similar complex here is pretty clear. If you spend so much time wallowing in self-pity, you completely miss out on the good things in life and a chance to make your life better. Things are hard for everyone, especially if you live in Gotham City, and what makes Arthur most pathetic is his hyperfixation on his own misery. In addition to being a miserable guy, Joker 2 goes to great lengths to demonstrate that Fleck isn't special, and that's probably gonna piss a lot of people off. Even with his violent outbursts and the body count of the first film, his greatest impact will be in his empty vessel for projection by others. He thinks his art and life are important, but they're not. Candidly, his craft sucks. He's all ego and no talent, and while you gotta admire the confidence to just go up on stage and completely bomb, I mean, what makes him think that this is gonna be his career path? Joker 2 employs a brilliant meta device to highlight Arthur's unoriginality: the jukebox musical. A jukebox of pre-existing societal concerns. This is not a guy with original ideas, he is merely parroting the concerns of others, making his celebrity merely the product of being in the right place at the right time. The whole Joker movement? It's not about him. He's a tool, a Trojan horse, to fuel a justified movement in protest of a genuinely broken and unjust system that has fucked over its people while the wealthy get wealthier. These are the real victims and action worth celebrating. As Arthur says in the first film,
"That's right, Murray, I'm not political."
A moment that could be misinterpreted as a position of neutrality so as not to alienate an audience, but what it highlights is this: Fleck stands for nothing. He is nothing. The most soaring moments in the film, the ones that elicit the greatest emotion, derive most of their strength from the fact that the songs performed are beloved standards of a bygone era. Joker thinks he's Frank Sinatra, but he's just some dipshit loser singing karaoke. And that's sad. This is reinforced by the fact that his singing is not good. It's not even remotely good. None of this is by accident. Phillips doesn't wait to shatter the fantasy of Joker's greatness. It's not some ace up his sleeve. It's his project from the very beginning. As I've said repeatedly, it's not only Fleck in Phillips' sight, it's the audience as well. And to avoid any of the confusion that followed the first Joker, he makes it explicit in the text with characters like Lee and Joker's small cohort of fans in attendance at the trial. They love Arthur when he embodies the persona they project onto him, but the minute he drops the facade, they abandon him. They only care about Joker. Joker 2 represents this mask-off moment. When it stops being the movie you thought Joker was, will you still be down for the ride? Will you still lap it up? Joker and its reception embody a sort of mythical ideal of this character. Joker 2 strips it all away and shows you the pathetic reality beneath. The way Lee is utilized in the film is so interesting. I love it, particularly because she bears little resemblance to the comic book Harley. I mean, it's kind of an inversion of that dynamic we're used to, and I'm all here for it. That's pretty cool. Instead, she represents a point of audience identification and implication to highlight the disconnect between Joker's image and Arthur's reality. She uses Arthur as a canvas on which to project her desires to rabble-rouse, commit crime, and stoke revolution, if you can even really call it that, but only so long as the facade is intact. She can't even fuck him without first disguising him as the Joker, a scene that reads intimate at first, but quickly becomes crass and depressing when we realize that Arthur is merely a tool. However, Arthur doesn't process this disconnect, and her obsession with him stokes his fantasies and drives him away from the wise counsel of his attorney and towards the sensationalism of the Joker. This fandom creates an echo chamber for him, bolstering all of his worst tendencies and further inflating his ego such that by the time he reaches the courtroom, he's primed to self-destruct. By projecting and ascribing our values and images onto figures ultimately drives them to destruction. They don't care about the man beneath the icon, and the minute the mask slips, they're gone without a trace, ostensibly leaving their heroes to die. This seems to be the project of the film. Phillips has a sort of righteous fury toward our parasocial relationship with media, an affliction that has grown exponentially in recent years. His signature meanness is on display here to meaningful ends. We need movies to explicitly articulate their politics, lest we find them to be amoral. We need Chapel Roan to parrot our exact beliefs verbatim, lest she be branded ignorant and irresponsible. We love a flawed human hiding behind makeup and persona, but we hate the sad complexity underneath. It's not a coincidence that this has grown in parallel to Trump and the MAGA movement, and it seems this is part of the text for Phillips. In previous decades, Trump's politics were less polarized, serving only himself and his wealth. But as he became a folk hero for a desperate population more interested in the idea of a man than the reality of one, he came to embody a suite of values that existed long before him and will exist long after. Joker 2 aims to rip the mask off of this false god and expose the pathetic truth, and its subversion is not only in character, but in genre. The presentation of the first Joker borrowed heavily from obvious Scorsese references of the 70s, and what initially seemed like a cool idea proved to be a bit too palatable for audiences. Just as a certain group of young, disenfranchised men see a hero in the much more complicated text of Taxi Driver, the textual familiarity of the first film made it a bit too easy to lionize the Joker. To further complicate the film, Phillips chose to abandon this more popular mode in favor of a genre whose recent box office returns demonstrate a fundamental lack of audience interest. The Hollywood musical. What initially seemed like a lighter mode for a Joker sequel and a vehicle for levity once again rejects the audience in its presentation. Most of the song and dance of the film, with minor exceptions, is sad, raspy, and understated. It exists not to embrace the audience, but to alienate. In short, it feels intentionally designed to piss a certain demographic of Joker fans off. It's a film that likes the concept of being labeled a musical more than it actually likes being a musical. Some of the fantasies, the musical numbers, are shot beautifully when they happen inside Arthur's mind, like genuinely worth going to see in IMAX for those sequences alone. But for the most part, they don't really add much to the story. They serve to reinforce the vapid myth of the Joker, something tantalizing and larger than life in theory, but rather dull and mundane in real life. Again, the way these ideas are utilized is part of the anti-joke of the film. Not only is this film a fuck you to the fans of the first film and of comic books, it's a fuck you to the fan that the marketing explicitly targets, a person excited to see a two-hander musical with Joaquin Phoenix and Lady Gaga, one of the biggest pop stars in the world. And you know what? Whether you like it or hate it or just feel like it rubs you the wrong way, you have to go hats off for that level of fuckery. It's just, this movie has my mad respect for just being what it is. An amusing recurring element in the film is the meta use of Joker as a TV movie that stands in for the first film within the text. Without seeing a moment of it, it's clear to any audience member exactly what the version of the story would look like. To many, it's a piece of shit. To others like Lee, it's an engine for the Joker fantasy. This is an effective commentary on the way we immediately turn horrific tragedy into product. It's like the stab film in Scream 2, coming immediately on the heels of a brutal murder. Sure, the tone is different, but Phillips, much like Wes Craven, shockingly, is deeply invested in this meta-commentary. A certain audience loves a nostalgic nod to New York cinema of the 70s, Joker. A certain unsophisticated consumer loves a soapy TV movie based on a true story with grisly details. What no one loves is a meta-musical sequel to a film that refuses the surface pleasures of its predecessor in favor of dragging an audience through the mud for 140 minutes before putting them on trial for their frankly embarrassing relationship to the intellectual property in question. Phillips knows this better than anyone, and he's fucking loving it. For most of the runtime, fans will hold out hope for some reversal or celebration of Joker to make it all worth it, to celebrate the revolutionary born of the first film, to be serviced as fans. But it never comes. In a particularly amusing fuck you to the audience, the film opening with Me and My Shadow tells us everything we need to know. We're just unlikely to receive it as such. Fleck is living in the shadow of a larger movement, in the idea of the Joker. He, as a person, is an expendable clown in a larger circus. Arthur isn't some insane person who saw flashing lights or disassociated from control. He's a narcissist who seized a moment because he felt slighted by society, and now, after a lengthy trial, he's exhausted. When he says, "I'm not the Joker," he's saying what we've always known, but disappointing his fans, Harley's sympathizers in the process. Arthur eventually comes to terms with his performance. There is no Joker. It was all Arthur. And we're confronted by the empty vessel we filled with our own beliefs and aspirations. Then we move on to the next clown. Joker 2 treats antagonism as its only virtue. It sets out to accomplish unpleasant things. It makes a mockery and circus out of comic book movies and Joker as a film. It makes a mockery of the system for allowing Todd to make a sequel with such disdain for the legacy of the first. And it makes a mockery of its audience by giving them a false mirror for reflection, only to shatter it while pulling the rug out from under them to expose them for the kind of people they really are. In the end, Joker doesn't even receive the spectacular send-off of a televised execution. He's stabbed to death by a deranged fan and left to bleed out alone on the floor, drowning the legacy of its predecessor. Sometimes it's worth it to be confronted by something and left feeling like shit. That's the power of art. It exists not only to please, but to challenge. And I think the reception of this film proves that sometimes we don't really want to be challenged or caught with our pants down. And in these terms, Joker 2 is a rousing artistic success. It's a film I actually think is going to age very well as more and more people watch it and really see it for this middle finger that it is. This Joker is bombing in front of its audience, sure, but as Todd Phillips is here to remind you, that is exactly what the Joker does.